Sounds good. Hi, welcome to the Friday webinar. We meet on the first and third Friday of each month. And I'm excited because we're going to talk today about a concept or a situation that comes in and I see in my office or presents in group. So hopefully it's very applicable to those who join us rather. I'm Debbie McRae. I'm a licensed therapist in Arizona, and my specialty is working with couples and addicts and betrayed partners who are dealing with addictions, particularly porn and sex addictions. So I'm very passionate about this work. Today, we're going to talk about kind of an interesting thought that came to me, and that was we're going to talk about the outs and ins of betrayal trauma recovery. So what does that mean? That means that we're going to talk about how the betrayed partner focuses has a direct effect on their healing progress. So if we have an inward focus, an outward focus, or forward focus, we're going to see different results. I'm going to give you some examples for each of those focuses, as well as some ideas on what to do, how to know if you're there. And this will be a great webinar to help you kind of assess where you're at in your own healing recovery journey. We're going to also talk about a concept about being intentional and making intentional choices. I find that this is a point in recovery that betrayed partners and even addict partners need to make in order to have the most success. I want to set a stage today as we talk about this healing journey and the ins and the outs of the recovery process. And that is, let's talk about how overwhelming betrayal is, because it is a very complex type of trauma. And in the simplest form, when we refer to betrayal trauma, we're really talking about the pain and the emotional distress that is experienced with severe deception by a loved one. And as a result, we have all these devastating experiences and events take place on the deepest level. It is like a storm at the biggest magnitude. It's the perfect storm, and unfortunately, it has a lot of devastating effects. So we find that the brain's offline all the time. So whoever has betrayal trauma, they're living in that limbic area where they're in fight, flight, or freeze. They're dealing with all the physical symptoms that come from being in that region of the brain, from anxiety to depression to numbing out, dissociation. They feel like they've lost their mind. You struggle when you're in this space to express your emotions, understand your emotions, manage your emotions. Like I said, with that anxiety and depression, it can lead even to anger and rage all across the board. There can be constant guilt or shame. You might find that you're experiencing grief, sometimes all the stages of grief, in the same day or the same week. There's even physical pain. So you're struggling with betrayal trauma and you might be having issues with your digestive system, stomach aches, headaches, difficulty sleeping, even immune systems that are suppressed. So you're getting sick quite often. There can be panic attacks, of course, and then we add that to the trust issues, the intrusive thoughts, the flashbacks, the attachment issues where you don't feel like you can turn to that loved one that you thought was safe, and so instead you isolate. We also get into our controlling behaviors because we're trying to feel safe again as betrayed partners. And in the midst of all of this, we're trying to make sense of our situation. So we're trying to take all the pieces of the information, put it together, and try to figure out every detail of what our addict partner did. The who, what, where, when, how often is constantly in the mind of a betrayed partner. So no wonder there's mood swings all over the place, being depressed from one minute to angry the next. And in the midst of all this, the betrayed partner's self-esteem takes a really big hit. They focus on what's wrong with them, what they should have done, could have done, and what they are not in the here and now. As a result, I have seen betrayed partners turn to substances. So there are times that they might turn to things to help them manage, and even sometimes those are compulsive behaviors, like a lot of spending, a lot of eating. It could even be alcohol or marijuana. So how long does it take to heal from betrayal trauma? Unfortunately, betrayal trauma recovery isn't accomplished in a few short weeks. The analogy that I like is that my betrayed partner comes in, and one of the first things they'll say to me is, I just want to hurry and get this over with. want to hurry and get recovered, get it over with, so I can move on with my life. So, in essence, they're coming in and they're treating betrayal trauma like they scraped their knee and we're going to put a band aid on it and they can continue moving forward. When in reality, they've been in a car wreck. There's multiple injuries and multiple things that must be done to aid in healing. So, the time frame for a full recovery from betrayal trauma is 18 months to 3 years. I know I've mentioned in the past that for an addict partner, recovery is 3 to 5 years to rewire the brain. So you can see that healing from this type of an addiction, from this type of a trauma, does take time, because overcoming the heartache and the pain from this trauma is very, very complicated. I think you saw that when I mentioned all the different things that a betrayed partner is dealing with. It also involves taking the correct steps so that recovery takes place in the best ways possible. So today I want to talk about, what gets in the way of our healing and in that healing timeline. And then what are the best possible things we can do to help move that timeline along without getting stuck. So the number one reason that betrayed partners get stuck or have slow progress in their healing timeline is that they have a focus that is outward. They're choosing to focus on what is happening with their addict partner. It's so natural in the early days of discovery and disclosure. I want you to understand that. This is a part of the healing process. It's part of betrayal. The brain is constantly scanning the betrayed partner's environment to make sure that they're safe. And as a result of that, they're looking for signs of danger, which means I'm looking at my addict partner. I'm noticing every little thing from their moods to what they're saying, where they're at, what they're doing, what time they get home. So I am looking not only for present danger, but then my mind is taking me back into past events and into the past dangers. So recovery efforts are really, really difficult because the addict partner is a threat on a continual basis. When we have an outward focus, it's coming from that place of fear and concern that somehow I'm never going to get healed and the relationship will never be repaired. It's very understandable. So there are lots of ups and downs for the betrayed partner when they're in this type of a focus. It's almost like the addict partner and the betrayed partner are in a roller coaster together. So if the addict partner's moving up and doing well, then so is the betrayed partner. But if the addict partner's just sliding down, so does the betrayed partner. And we don't want it to necessarily be done like that. There's a better, healthier way to do that. The progress for a betrayed partner is slower if I, in my recovery, am focusing continually on the addict partner. I'm looking outward. I will see clients get stuck in their progress. I see them looping, which means they're dealing with the same thing over and over and over again. And as much as we work in session and we problem solve and they go out and try new recovery tools, they don't seem to be making any forward progress. As a result of all of this, with this outward focus, I see the betrayed partners having a lot of anxious attachment. And so a lot of their mood really does depend on if their addict partner's there for them, right? It's constantly, are you going to show up for me? Can I trust you? And that's understandable. And it is part of that natural progression in the early days of recovery. We're going to talk in a moment about how we have to get to a point where we shift that. So how do you know if you're doing outward focus? Well, I'm going to tell you exactly what I hear. Clients come in with, group members will say this. So I want you to kind of test yourself and see. Do you say any of the following? It's his problem and it's not mine. So I'm not the one who needs to go to therapy or join a group. It's his responsibility. It's her responsibility. I've done my own therapy in the past. I don't need it right now. It's my addict partner who needs to do it more than I do. I see that one. I'd do so much better if my addict partner would work on his recovery, or if my addict partner would learn how to have empathy. It's my addict partner's responsibility to help me regulate. He or she did this to me. So they need to help me get out of it. So consequently, we are only as good as our addict partner is doing. It's my partner's fault that I get triggered. If they would just stop doing this, or if they would start doing this, then I wouldn't get triggered. My recovery is my addict recover's responsibility. I've actually heard that. My recovery goes well as long as my addict partner lets me know where they are at, what they are doing, who they are talking to. Every little detail of their lives needs to be shared so that I can trust what they are telling me. Unless my partner does disclosure, I won't ever be able to heal. And that's really tough when you have an addict partner who's not willing to do disclosure. I'm not going to even start healing until there's disclosure. I have some betrayed partners put their healing on hold. And so we can't get them to move forward because they're waiting for that disclosure to take place. And the last one is my addict partner needs to hurry up in their recovery so I can figure out what I'm going to do moving forward. And what I hear again and again is this: I don't have very many good years left. Yeah, that's a big one. So at some point, the betrayed partner has got to start focusing on making a different choice. And they've got to decide they're going to do their recovery differently. So they've got to shift into being more intentional, and they've got to start their approach with their recovery from an inward focus. So when I refer to this point of choice, I'm talking about this awareness of knowing the difference between if I'm focusing on my addict partner or if I'm turning and focusing on me and my recovery and what I'm doing, the work I'm doing, how I'm progressing. There's a big, big difference. It requires that the betrayed partner has to be very intentional. This has to be a choice. So, what does an inward focus look like? So, how do you know if you're being intentional and choosing to focus inward and making that the focus of your healing journey? So, I'm going to give you some ideas of what it looks like. The first thing it looks like is it looks like you're choosing to live in recovery with a plan. You're not just taking it day by day and trying something here and there. Instead, you've got a therapist, a qualified therapist. You have a group for support for a big part of that healing journey. Maybe it's a psychoeducational group. Maybe after that, it's more of a support group, but you constantly have that support. It's part of the plan. You have a plan for your daily recovery. So we've got routines and rituals. We have certain activities we do every day. It might be I'm working on my group work for 15 minutes a day. I'm doing meditation for a certain amount of minutes a day. I'm reaching out to people. I'm really focusing on my dailies. So I'm focusing on supporting my physical health, that spiritual aspect of me, that relational aspect of me, and that emotional aspect of me, which is self-care. Very, very important. If you don't have a plan and you're not doing it consistently, then you're not going to move forward in recovery. I've said this many times, and it's this: when a betrayed partner comes into session and they are struggling after having been doing well, I always go back to, what are you doing? What's your recovery plan? What are you doing? What are you failing to do? And I always find that they are not doing consistent recovery. That's so important. We expect the addict partner to do consistent recovery over time. And I always tell the betrayed partners, if we expect that of them, then we need to expect that of ourselves. So that's the kind of attitude you have to have. The next one is, and it's a hard one, you've got to choose to take ownership of your own healing. You have to get to a point in recovery where you go, you know what? I can't depend on my addict partner to make me whole. The only person that has control over that is me. And so what does that look like? Oftentimes I'm working with clients and helping them shift out of that outward focus to the inward focus. So if you don't know what that looks like, then turn to other people who are maybe further ahead in your recovery and ask them. Go to your therapist and ask them. Go to your Marco Polo group or your text group, messaging, and ask them, how do I stop focusing on my addict partner's recovery, and how do you guys focus on yourself? Get some ideas and then start just recognizing that even though it is not fair that this has happened to you, you didn't cause it. The outcome of this is actually your responsibility because you get to choose whether or not you're going to do your own healing or not. And it's going to be so much easier if you decide you're going to be responsible for it. The next one is you've got to persistently and actively affirm your recovery goals, which means that I can't be stagnant. That means that I am constantly looking at what I'm doing. If something doesn't work, then I'm going to let go of that and figure out something better. If I'm finding a bump in the road or I'm getting stuck, then I'm going to take the steps rather than just sitting in it. I'm going to figure out what can I do, right? I'm going to remind myself why my recovery goals are so important, why I need to do self-care, why I need to reach out rather than isolate. I'm also recognizing when I'm doing a good job. I'm affirming my work and reminding myself that, you know what, this day I got through, I did all of my recovery goals and I only had one trigger. So I am affirming that I'm being persistent. I'm affirming rather that I'm being persistent and I'm doing my recovery goals. That's really important. It's that internal dialogue, that positive dialogue that keeps us going and motivated for making that change. The next one is you have to intentionally choose to be in the present moment. This is difficult, especially in those earlier days. And at some point, you have to decide, I only have control over the here and now. A couple times this week, I worked with clients where I said, whoa, you're way out in the future. You're in 2 stories into the future. So let's come back into the here and now and let's work on what's going on in this moment for you. I even tell my clients sometimes if you find yourself in the future in the past, you might have to stop and say, you know what? Today is Friday, October 6th, and I am choosing to step back into today. I am not going to go back to the past and I'm not going to go into the future because I have no control over that. I'm choosing to live in the here and now. So that can be on repeat if you're having a hard time. Again, you can do some mindfulness practice if you're struggling with that. Get back into your body. Learn what you need to do in order to be in the present moment. I will have clients come up with specific sayings, right? Their mantras, their affirmations that they go to when they're struggling with living in the present moment. So it's very important. Again, it's a choice. I can choose to get out of my stories, whether they're from the past or from the future. Okay, the next one is you've got to create the right environment for your healing. And I'm going to combine that with you also have to choose healthy relationships to fall back on who offer you support. This is really important. You cannot do recovery alone. And even in your inward focus, you need other people to support you. You need other people to bounce ideas off. You need other people who validate you. You need other people who will, with their compassionate truth bombs, tell you what you're doing that's not so healthy. We need other people to help us. So I'm not saying if I've got an inward focus that I can only do my recovery alone. I'm saying that you're focusing on your recovery, but you're asking other people to join in with you. Now, here's a pitfall I see happen, and that is when I'm in my trauma, I do want to talk about my stories and all the things that my addict partner did to me. And as a result, I might find somebody else who's just right there with me, and they are agreeing with me, and they are right on board. And they are reminding me, that my partner, my addict partner, really is an awful person. Well, Brene Brown calls that common enemy intimacy. It's a way that we short circuit connection because it's really not connection. And what it does for both the addict partner and possibly the other person that's doing that is it keeps them stuck because I'm not looking at the possibilities. I'm not in that space of giving my addict partner, the benefit of the doubt and giving them time to do recovery. And so we need to make sure that as we're turning to people, we're turning to people that are healthy. I've talked about this in the past. I had my handful, my circle of 5, I called them, that I went to. And so I did have somebody who was my logic and reasoning, my devil's advocate person. I had the person I could cry ugly tears to, who would just soothe me and comfort me. I had somebody who had been through it and was ahead of me and could give me hope. And so that's the kind of support you want to get. You want group members that are wise that you can turn to because they have such wisdom and they can give you some great ideas when you're struggling. Okay. The next thing is you have to choose to deal with your recovery challenges in a healthy way. This means you need to learn to step into your emotions, to feel them, to identify them, to work with them without them overtaking your entire mood. So if I'm angry, I need to recognize I'm angry, how it feels in my body, maybe what triggered it, what's the story I'm in about my anger. And then you've got to get curious. You're going to ask that anger, what are you here for? I know you're here to help me. What are you trying to help me with? What do I need to do differently? We have to get curious. And then we have to sit and feel that emotion in our body. And we've got to do a mindfulness practice where we start to breathe and we start to work on letting those emotions just move through our body however they need to move. Give yourself a couple of minutes and you'll find that those emotions will move through your body, especially if you're working on identifying why they are there and what the purpose is. Because our emotions, even distressing emotions, are there to keep us safe. So keep that in mind. The next thing is we've got to deal in a healthy way. You've got to create safety through healthy boundaries, which means you've got to figure out what they are. You've got to set them. You've got to readjust them. You have to maintain them. And you have to do that without hesitating. And you've got to do it on repeat. So it does say it takes some time and some work. Then the next thing is you've got to learn to manage triggers and trauma symptoms without them stopping your forward movement in recovery, which means I have to have a plan. I have to figure out what works for me. And then when I start to get activated, when I move into that, I have to recognize when I am. So then I can stop in that moment and choose to deal with that response in a different way. That's the point of choice I talk to my clients about all the time. And that is when you start to see something that triggers you or feel something or think about something that triggers you, you've got to recognize that shift and change that happens. Because in that moment, you have that point where you can choose, am I going to react? Which means I'm going to go to automatic, right? I'm going to be very reactive. I'm going to repeat what I do again and again. Or am I going to respond? Which means, am I going to sit, take a breath, get grounded, think about my choices, my options, and then I'm staying connected to prefrontal before I decide how I'm going to deal with that trigger or what I'm going to do. I know it sounds really easy when I say it that way. It is hard and it takes work, but you can do it. I know you can. I've seen it again and again and again. The next one is you've got to choose to live your life in your recovery for yourself and not for your addict partner, not even for your kids. The most effective change happens when it comes from within. We call that intrinsic motivation, meaning I've decided that I want to change, I want to heal. We don't see change happening that's lasting. I should say lasting change is not as successful when I've got somebody outside of me telling me to change and how I need to change. It's a different type of motivation. It's a different experience. So you have to consciously choose and make that choice to live your life and your recovery for you, right? Doesn't matter. Hopefully you can get to that point where you go, I'm going to suspend all expectations about whether this relationship is going to make it or not. At this point in time, I'm just going to focus on my recovery and we'll see where it goes. I'm going to live from day to day to day. That is actually a healthy position to be in. That is why we recommend that when you're entering recovery, that you don't make any big decisions, especially regarding the relationship, for at least 12 to 18 months. You've got to work recovery first. Okay. Next thing, you've got to choose to embrace the belief that you didn't cause it, you can't control it, and you can't cure it. It being your partner's addiction. You have to recognize that you don't have control and you have to be okay with not having control. And that's really hard for those of us like me who I like control. And to be able to figure out how do I let go of control and what does that look like for me? And what are the activities that I do to help me get there? And so that would be something if you're struggling with control, especially controlling your partner's recovery, go in and see your therapist, work with your therapist on how to get out of that. And then as you're doing that, you're going to see that you have a choice at some point where you can start to look ahead to your future, and you can choose to step into hope, and you can choose to be confident that no matter what happens, you're going to be okay. I love it when I hear group members and my clients come in and say, you know what? I just realized the other day, I'm going to be okay. And I go, well, what do you mean you're going to be okay? Well, it doesn't matter. If my partner slips or goes back and relapses, I now have enough tools. I have enough people to support me. I realize it's going to be really hard. I don't want that to happen, but I'm actually going to be okay. I can do it. And that's a very powerful, empowering place to be. Okay. So the goal for the betrayed partner's healing journey is to get to the point where your inward focus partners now with your forward focus. Because that's really important that we have the ability to start focusing forward in our recovery. So what does that look like? Very briefly, it looks like you can easily set and maintain boundaries that create safety on a consistent basis. It's so easy for you now. You come to terms with your experience. You accept what happened as it is what it is, and it's part of my human experience. And we can also start to have gratitude. So that's the next point that shows that we're starting to focus forward. Is I can actually, in the midst of all of the grief and the loss and the pain, I can find those points of gratitude, as well as gratitude in the here and now for what my recovery taught me and how it changed me. When I'm forward focusing, I can support others who are healing and have empathy for them. I have the ability now to join them in their pain. And that is a incredible gift that comes from doing your recovery, is that you know what somebody needs who's experienced betrayal trauma, because you can relate, because you've been there. You also, if you're in that forward focus, you're working on letting go and surrendering. And you get to that point where you're doing it without having a struggle on a daily basis. So again, it's a skill set. It's something we learn. And so we're thinking about, I've got to let this go so I can move forward. So I'm not taking all this pain and hurt with me. And so that is part of the forward focus. As a betrayed partner, forward focus requires that we embrace and love who we are in spite of our flaws. And we have to let go of all of the beliefs we have about not being good enough. We have to accept that we are human and that we are just perfect, even though we're imperfect, and there's nothing wrong with us. And I know that's very, very hard, but we do have to have those moments, and we have to make that a place where we want to get to, part of our destiny. And then lastly, I put down, we want to recognize the post-traumatic growth. So for me, what that looked like was, I got to a point one day where I said, you know what? I am so grateful I'm who I am today. And I know that I am who I am because of what I experienced, all the betrayal trauma. I don't ever want to go through it again. However, I am not willing to give up the changes that took place in me, because I like who I am today a whole lot better than how I used to be. And so that has been for me a way that I've been able to embrace that awful experience with gratitude, because I've seen the growth that's taken place. So I hope you take a few minutes and intentionally assess where you're at. Be really honest with yourself. Don't gaslight yourself. We talked a little bit about that last time. And take this awareness to your therapist or to your group. If you're stuck in some of these areas, especially in that outward focus, then take it to them. Explain the situation. Be vulnerable. Be honest and open. And then begin to work just one area at a time so that you can begin to shift that focus on you. You're going to see that you heal quicker. You are going to have deeper healing. You're going to resolve the trauma. And so you're not back in it again and again and again if you choose the latter two, which is the inward focus and the forward focus. So those are my thoughts for today. And that's been my experience, not only with clients, but with my own journey.
Yeah, and I'm going to ditto the everything I've learned, every painful situation, I'm ultimately grateful for it because, for example, I had empathy for betrayed partners, but when I went through a really challenging betrayal, like I got it a whole lot different and deeper, and
Mhm.
I know that I feel it differently, and I'm willing to use it.
Mhm.
But I was thinking, yeah, I'm sure no one here is going like, yeah, I really want to, go through this pain so I can help others in this, the same way. So at some point, like Debbie said, it's acceptance of, this can be used for the good. I wanted to talk about, because you're like, it's easier to set and maintain boundaries. And I had this idea that a bunch of people on the webinar are going, I'm so not there. And I'm like, it is really challenging. So these are things to work towards. And I think when you talked about, like, ask your group, if you're outward focused, ask your group.
Mhm.
And then I would say celebrate. If you make progress in an area, go yay, and start to internalize, how does that feel? I feel like I'm making some progress. I've let go of some things. Great. And I think that will be motivating to see, moving forward.
Mhm.
I wrote down the word contingent, like when you were talking about, I can't heal until you do, until we do a disclosure, or like putting it, my healing is contingent on an external thing. And I was thinking, like I am then turning over all of my recovery, all of the control over to someone else, because they are now, pulling the puppet strings on,
Mhm.
I'm not going to do disclosure, so therefore you can't heal. And I was like, that feels like a disempowering, that's probably not even a word, but like it feels like a place that would not be safe, but also, keep someone stuck. And then I wrote down stuck, and what did I write down? Oh, stuck in the past. Okay, so when you're talking about the present, I want you to elaborate on this a little bit, because when you're going like, oh, just focus on today, and you didn't say it like that, but it's like, if I'm
Mhm.
focusing on today, but Debbie, what about all that painful stuff in the past, and how do I, pull that in, acknowledge what was in the past, not be fearful of the future, and so can you talk a bit about that?
That is a great point you bring up. We are not going to ignore the past. So, what I ask my clients to do is, when they are stuck and they're stuck in the past, I'm going to ask them to put a container around it, meaning, hey, let's take this and let's imagine we're putting it to a container because we're going to work on this. And you're going to work on this when you come into session with me. So we're going to do whatever trauma work we need to do, whether it is we're going to talk through it, we're going to do some processing that way, do something experiential, do some type of a therapeutic modality. We are going to address those things. But what gets us stuck is, it's almost like the old record is kind of stuck in the same groove, right? When you're outside of maybe your sessions or day-to-day life and you just can't get out of it, that's the kind of stuck in the past I'm talking about. But because we need to be able to look at the past, and we know we're healing when we can look back at the past and we don't get triggered, and we don't go into our monkey mind where we're talking all over the place and we can't get out of those thoughts. So yes, we are going to go into the past. The thing is, I do see people, they go back into the past, and I will hear them tell me one story after the next, after the next, after the next, and then pretty soon it's the same stories over and over and over again. So that's how you know you're stuck in the past. So sometimes I will work in session with clients, and we're just going to do a visualization, and we're going to put all of those in the container, right? And then we're going to put them somewhere in my office, so they're going to leave it there. And then I take them through a visualization of them leaving my office and going back out and being present in the real world. So that is one way we can manage it. Another way is you can get out of being stuck in the past by even just doing a journal dump. I love that too. Get it out of your head if you're struggling, right? Don't just keep doing the same thing, same thing, same thing over and over again, especially if you're getting activated and you're not feeling good. So it's not that we're not going to go back to the past or acknowledge the past. We just don't want to go back there and get stuck where it is not helpful and it doesn't help you heal. So that would be how I would, you know.
Yeah, that's really helpful for clarification too, because because all the addict partners are going, "Well, yeah, let's forget about that. That's in the
Oh,
past,
yeah.
and we should just move forward, and so I appreciate you acknowledging, and clarifying on that point. I think the future tripping too. It's like, yes, but that's what healthy boundaries are for. Is I have
Yeah.
boundaries for my safety, not punishment against anybody else. But
Mhm.
so if something happens, I have the tools and support, to manage that. And you share towards the end too. It's like, I'm going to be okay regardless of what someone else is doing. And even I use act or react, but you said that, react or respond. And yeah, I want to
Mhm.
choose my actions. I want to choose how I respond rather than, again, being, I was thinking of the pinball machine where you're at the whim of somebody else. I'm
Mhm.
just being bounced around. What an uncomfortable and unsafe place to be is if I'm always at someone else's whim. So healthy boundaries provide the safe container for me, for my safety. So questions, we would love to have you type in questions in the Q&A at the bottom. I know I highlighted something else too.
I was going to say, if anybody has a
that
point
place.
in their recovery where they feel stuck, please
Mm,
share. We'd be happy to kind of maybe brainstorm with you and give you some ideas. I know that we have seen people in recovery and have some ideas on that because sometimes it's hard once you're stuck. Sometimes it's even hard to recognize you're stuck.
yeah, yeah, but I think the points that you made about, you can ask yourself these questions, like that's a good place to start. I really think it's key too, like you talked about having healthy people around. Oh, that was the other thing when you're talking about, because I hear this where the Brene Brown, where it is the common enemy,
Intimacy.
intimacy, where, yeah, like, and we work really hard with our drop-in groups to make sure that it's a safe place and we're not bashing, either, the addicts are not bashing partners are not bashing the addicts. We understand that the behaviors are problematic and hurtful, but getting into the, oh, it will never change, and there, all of those things, we see too many people that do change, that are willing to step into this difficult space and have a different future. So there is hope, and not everybody chooses it. So again, data for, is this safe for me to, stay, or do I need to pull my boundaries in a little tighter? Okay, but but there's a path forward, and I really appreciate that you kept using the visual of, moving forward, and that is, we have limited time, so moving forward in a way that is meaningful and helps us each grow, you know
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think we get to be more our true selves. So
I want to kind of come back around and talk about a point, in being stuck, especially in trauma. We have to also recognize that, some clients have had previous traumas in their life, and then they have betrayal trauma. So it's like I say, we've got trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma, and that gets very complex. And so there are times where we have to kind of assess trauma, especially if somebody's stuck, and we have to figure out, okay, are there other things going on here? Right? Do we need to maybe have you get on some type of medication to support your brain
mm,
and your brain functioning? And, in my past, I was a registered nurse. And so I know how the brain functions. And I know that the serotonin levels in the brain are so critical. So I often find with clients who get stuck in their trauma that it really is partly their brain. When we have a lot of trauma, especially complex trauma, a couple things happen with the brain. One thing is the brain quits making the serotonin as efficiently as it used to. The other thing is the brain will use it up too quickly. And so as a result, the brain needs that serotonin. It's what we call a neurotransmitter. So it takes that electrical signal from one neuron to the next. It kind of transports it across the little gap. So if we don't have enough serotonin, then the brain's not firing the same. So oftentimes when I see a client that's really stuck, and I know they're stuck when we can't get them out of crisis and we can't increase that window of tolerance. So lots of times my recommendation is, and I don't do it very often, and that is, let's have you go to somebody who's highly qualified, and I have the names of some good people that are conservative, that we can get you on some medications. I have some recommendations for them to ask their their psychiatrist rather, or their psychiatric nurse practitioner about, and let's put you on it for 6 months and evaluate. Let's check in 9 months, right? Let's check it a year. And sometimes, we're weaning you off within a few months because now we've gotten you to a place where your window of tolerance is wider. So, if some of you are at home and you're going, I'm just stuck and I can't move forward and I've got all this trauma, a lot of this will sound very overwhelming. I get it. And so you might need that extra support. And it's okay, because I know we have a stigma about being on medication, but if you think about it, it's something that the brain needs that it can't produce, just like a pancreas can't produce insulin for a diabetic, then it kind of shifts. You cannot become addicted to a psychiatric med. Does your brain become dependent on it? Well, yes, to help it function. So that's why when you go off of it, the doctor is going to help you and you go off slowly. And I find that there are certain ones that I think are better than others. They have fewer side effects. So those are the things you want to check in and ask about. So just a little blurb on that too.
Yeah, but you talked about that, but like that wouldn't be something that you'd be looking at, like when somebody's just in the like, this is like they've been trying this for a while and you're feeling like there's just not an ability to move forward, right?
Absolutely. They have been, typically they are well into recovery. They've been doing group work. We may have been able to get them through disclosure, but then all of a sudden they're just back in their trauma again and again and again, and they can't regulate. We just can't seem to get a foundation underneath their feet, right? And then I also have not only the betrayal trauma coming in, but now we've got past trauma coming up. And so I have to look at that and go, okay, we've got to calm your system down. And the only way to do that sometimes is to support your brain. And because that helps increase your window of tolerance. So you're right. This is not one of the first things we do. This is something that's down the road.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a question. I'm the betrayed partner. I feel afraid to open myself up sexually because of 5 relapses in the last 26 years. My PA is doing a full recovery program and taking medication. I just don't trust it to last. We are 9 months out of the last relapse in December of last year.
What I would like to know is if there's anything different in the last 9 months, because you said there's been 5 relapses in 26 years. So if I were your therapist, I'd want to go, okay, tell me about those relapses. What did it include? What did it involve? Okay. I would also kind of find out what was going on at that time. But now we've had 9 months, right? What's different between in the past and now? So am I seeing that my partner is doing recovery differently? Is my partner more open? Is my partner seeking their, going to their therapy, going to their group, they're open, they're honest, they're doing check-ins with me. Maybe we're doing couples work, and now we're finally getting to that place of vulnerability, right? There's that consistent recovery over time, so that I can, in my head, intellectually see, yes, they're doing things that would indicate to me that they are trustworthy. So if that's the case for you, then what you're going to need to do in order to get to that place where you can open yourself up sexually is several things. One of them is you're going to need to get into couples work. I happen to like emotionally focused therapy because we need to get into an environment with a therapist where we feel safe and we can talk about things, the really hard things. And both partners can show up with empathy and we can create that connection, because a lot of being able to open up sexually is I have to feel emotionally safe. I even have to feel physically safe. So I need to talk about that. And I need to do it in a way that you can hear me and that you're there for me and that you'll show up for me, that you get me. And so that is really, really an important piece. We have to talk about it. We've got to figure out how to do it differently than we've done it in the past. Another thing is you need to work with a qualified therapist. There are those of us who are CSATs that are training in sex therapy. And so we are helping our clients work with this exact thing. How do I kind of step into my sexuality again, where I'm not triggered, I'm not traumatized, I'm maybe have some beliefs and some attitudes from the past that I need to assess and look at and work through. And then how do I step into my sexuality with somebody I'm just building trust with. And so it's a process. Not only is it just, we don't just jump right in, and start having sex right away. There is an actual process that we take clients through, and it takes several months. And it's approached as almost like a meditative process, meaning we spend time and we create a space and an environment where we are focusing on this connection. And so we're focusing on that emotional intimacy, the physical intimacy that's leading to the sexual intimacy. And we do it. And in that process, we're doing it with just simply, we're holding hands and hugging. And that's the whole week. We do that daily. And then the next week, it might be, we're kissing, but just a quick kiss, on the cheek or the lips, right? And that's for a week. But in that process, as we're moving up and becoming more and more intimate, as a couple, you're working on journaling what you're feeling, sharing what you're feeling. So that's why it's really important that you get, couples therapists that can help you with that, because we're trying to completely change not only how safe you feel in your own body and with this partner who's had the addiction, but also the addict has got to learn what healthy sexuality is, because they've had this distorted sense of it. They don't really know what it is. So they've got to relearn that as well. So yes, it's risky. I want to validate that. It's very frightening and scary. I can imagine that you are very hesitant to even want to go there. And I want you to know that that's normal. So get the support you need, find the qualified people that are there to support you. And I tell my betrayed partners, take it as slow as you need to take it. You don't have to rush right into it. I've had clients come in and say, well, his 90 days of sobriety are up, and so I guess we're going to have sex tonight. And I'm like, wait, do you want to have sex tonight? And they will say, well, no, not really. Okay, what do you need for safety? So that's another place to start too, and that you can make a list of, here's what I need for safety, right? Here's what safety would look like for me. Here's what I would feel if I were safe. So kind of really kind of going into and kind of identifying what it is you need in order to be able to be in that moment and have that experience.
Yeah, and I love that you're talking about like holding hands and everything. I think everybody goes to penetrative sex, and that's what that's the goal. And and at a magic number, okay, now we need to do this. And I'm like, yeah, it's so much different. And I would love it if you can share with your partner of many decades that I'm afraid that this won't last. But I was also thinking what you were sharing, Debbie, earlier about like stuck in the past or future tripping. He's got no guarantee. I have no guarantee. I don't, I've been in recovery quite a while, and I can't ever tell you that I'm never going to whatever, but for today, I'm doing what I need to do. So I really appreciate when you talk about what's different this time. And if you are seeing something different, are you able to be a little vulnerable? And that might be, holding hands or hugging. Again, you get to say, the level of contact. We often talk about sensate, focus, touch, and it could be, a foot massage. I mean, it can be. It's different, and it is slower paced. Can you, like when you were dating, walk in the park together and hold hands? Whatever it is that does feel safe, that builds intimacy. And it's okay to say, like, we're holding hands and this feels good and I'm scared. That's all. A lot of what I think we forget is that we can communicate. Like we can share. Like that's what real vulnerability and intimacy is I'm sharing with you. And you talked about the addicts, Debbie, and we have a work group for the guys that is healthy intimacy and sex, and it's the intimacy comes first before the sex, because we want because everybody else would rather reverse those or skip the intimacy. But we want to help people learn how to to be observant and to connect in different ways. So so we've got a work group on that. But yeah, it's your safety. There are no guarantees. What is your goal with a relationship? Is it that you want to be connected physically? Then you're here. How do you get there? And Debbie had some great suggestions of working with a qualified professional, who not just gets addiction, but does get, Dr. Rob, many of them are are trained, as in the clinical sexology as well. So
Mhm.
otherwise it's kind of compartmentalized and
Yeah.
it's more challenging.
So you made me think of a couple of things, and that is at some point there is risk and we have to be vulnerable. That's a very hard place to be. And so we can take it at your own pace. And you talked about touch. One of the things that you have to do as you're reintroducing healthy sexuality is we have to understand that there's non-sexual touch and sexual touch, right? And non-sexual touch can just stay that. You know, any physical touch does not always have to lead to sex. And so that's another aspect of this. And we have to be vulnerable, right? And have that conversation. That's where I see a lot of partners. That's where they just have a difficult time, right? We don't know how to talk about it. It's so triggering. It is, of course, this is the area where the trauma's been. And so this type of work is not going to be in the early days of recovery. I hate to tell you that. It is what I call some of that more advanced recovery work, if you want to call it that way, because we've got more skills and tools in our belts, right? We're more regulated. We've got a lot more understanding. And so we're now at that point where we see that there's consistency and we're rebuilding trust. And so there's lots of different parts and pieces that need to be put into place. One of the things that we also do with the betrayed partners is have them read Emily Nagoski's book, Come As You Are. That is a great book to kind of just help you understand your own sexuality as a woman. I think it's got some really good content in it. So if you're trying to figure out, again, about your sexuality and opening up and what does that mean, it's a really, really good book. I'm not going to lie. Some of my clients will read it and group members, and they'll say it's a little triggering. And I'll say, yeah, it is. So just read a page at a time and sit down and think about it. Come in here and talk about it. Of course, we assess to see if they're ready. Do we need to put a pause on this? Do we need to keep moving forward? And so I think that's a really great place to start. I will work with him on things, and these exercises are in the back of Rob Weiss's and Kim Buck's book called Practicing Prodependence. And we'll do a body embrace. And we'll go through a variety of different questions on sexuality and your experience and your attitudes and beliefs. And so there's some of that we do as well. Rewriting your sexual script. That's a tongue twister. There's those types of things that you do in order to help you be able to kind of move back into that area and aspect of your life.
Well, and I think there's a misperception, that addicts aren't scared or fearful as well. There's anxiety on both sides of the equation. So I think having those conversations, to remove temptations to fall into a shame spiral, but also to go, hey, we have more alike with this. We're both nervous about this. An addict has been living in a compartmentalized world, and so to be willing and vulnerable and show up differently is an intimate and vulnerable experience for an addict too. So both of you are experiencing probably something similar, and so navigating that gap is
and another
a
thing that
challenge.
shows up, you're talking about the addict, another thing that shows up is a lot of the addicts go through those 90 days of sobriety, and they're trying to hit the reset, right? And what happens lots of times is they become sexually anorexic, meaning they're afraid to kind of step back into their sexuality because the fear is then I'm going to go back into my addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And that's many of them have to work through that. That's not necessarily the case. It really isn't, especially if they're doing recovery. They're supposed to be doing recovery. And what happens though for the partner is they might be sexual and they approach their addict partner who's, in that anorexic state. And that can create a lot of disconnection because I'm being vulnerable with you and you're rejecting me. And so that sometimes is something we have to stop and work on for a little bit as, the partners are working their own individual recovery. We've got to bring them together and work on that as well. So I see that happen. And I work with, like I said, the women who I'm trying to ease back into this slowly, rather than just jumping right in. I need to create that safety slowly as I go. So those are a couple things that show up. So I want you to know that that's not uncommon.
Yeah. Well, and um, at the end of the day, what is the goal? And if the goal is to be sexually, connected, then how do you get from where you are now to there? And and if the worst happens, you guys have been together for a really, in this particular question, you guys have been together a really long time. I bet you'll weather it. It would be unfortunate, painful, all of those things, but I bet you would. I bet you would, have the support you need to continue to move forward. It always sucks. I'm not pretending it doesn't, but yeah, I talk to lots of people, but with the partners, they are stronger than they know they are. And they don't have to, wither into themselves. It's like there is support.
Mhm.
I will be okay. I don't like this, but I will be okay. So.
Yeah. So one of the places I would take her as a client would be, I just don't trust it to last. We would go to worst case scenario, all the worst things that, you fear and what would make it not last. And then we bring it back to the reality. And how would you handle that then? Right? What do
Mhm,
you know now? How are you doing life differently that would help you handle that? What
mhm,
is the negative belief associated with that? Right? Especially that part of, I don't trust. That's a big
mhm,
piece. And
mhm.
so that is going to be part of your reprocessing your trauma, that I can't trust piece. Very, very important. So that's some of the work that you can do individually, if you're not ready to start working with your partner on that the sexual intimacy in a relationship. Maybe get into that and work on your fears, so that because that can be a block. That can be such a block that you almost are paralyzed to move forward. So I would go a little deeper on that as well.
That is great. We are almost out of time and we don't have any more questions. So I will look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. Matt Wheeler
Yes.
will be on Friday next week. So watch that. And I know it's premature for the time change, but that'll happen in November. So the time will shift an hour. So this is one group that shifts. But it'll be on the calendar. So make sure you watch for that as well. So, okay, thanks. I've got 2.5 pages. No, I got 3 pages of notes again. So I always do. Great
Okay.
content. So appreciate it.
You're
Take care,
welcome.
everybody.
Okay,
Bye
bye.
bye.